Hello and welcome to Unlocked, an interview series proudly brought to you by Harness Projects, a new learning experience designed for the future of work. I'm Michael O'Brien, and along with my co-founder, Chris Ventura, we're excited to bring you this series of conversations with industry leaders, entrepreneurs, futurists, and creative minds, exploring and unlocking the potential for individuals and businesses to flourish in a disrupted world. In this episode, co-founder of Harness Projects, Chris Ventura, is talking about the trends that are disrupting the modern workplace, as well as what learning our societies must do to prepare for the modern world, with Thom Markham, educator, positive psychologist, global entrepreneur, and founder of PBL Global, an online training platform for teachers worldwide. As founding director of Voices for the Learning World, Thom is also committed to inspiring a worldwide conversation to transform learning and help people develop a project mindset that prepares them for work and life.
Thom, really nice to see you again.
Thank you, Chris. Great to see you.
Thom, so to kick things off, I like to ask a question to our guests that we tend to ask all of our Harness Project students at the beginning of their workshops, and that is, what excites you about today, but equally, what scares you about today?
Well, at the moment, I am most excited about the fact that in education, the Berlin Wall has fallen because no one quite knows what to do. It is the most interesting moment in education in my lifetime, and I think it will be in most people's lifetimes as we go forward, because with the advent of so much online learning, the last figure I saw, 59 million students out of school and learning online. That means that something drastically is changing. And we can talk a little bit about what that means, but in a sort of the short version is that, first of all, it means students are experiencing being in a classroom and learning on their own. Now that's happening to varying degrees. As I understand, about a third of the students are loving the freedom and doing great things. About a third are doing the worksheets that their teachers send to them. And about a third of them, we don't know where. But the fact is that we're getting reports of students really doing work, as well as teachers doing really interesting work. And what I think is there's really two sort of results from that. One is, I think that we're going to rethink everything, testing particularly, standards also. The second thing is, I think that when students and teachers actually return to school, and I know in Australia they have been trickling back and the schools are open. In the US, we'll reopen in about 2 months. And when that happens, I think teachers and students are going to be thinking much differently about education. So that excites me because I think it's really time to have a very deep and new conversation about what school should look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, if you ask me what scares me, there's always the flip side, that scares me. For one thing, I think on all of our minds is the question of employment and how people are going to be able to go forward and find meaningful employment, particularly for the millennial group, which I've been reading article after article, which says they will suffer for 2 decades from this particular crisis. I don't know if that's true, but they're clearly going to be impacted more than many other sort of parts of the workforce. So I worry about them. So I worry about underemployment, unemployment. That certainly is a big thing on my mind. And if I had to even broaden the picture out, I'd say what scares me right now is that I don't think people are thinking nationally like they need to. Internationally, I really do not like the trend towards nationalism and sort of pulling back. This to me is exactly the wrong time to pull back. Yeah,
fair point. And I guess, if we think about what can people do as the first step, I'd love you to share more about the work that you've done in project-based learning and how it's even evolved even since the changes with the coronavirus pandemic.
It's actually gone through a really interesting progression, Chris. When I first started doing project-based learning in the early 2000s, it was really a very teacher-directed, school-oriented enterprise. It was good. It was an improvement. It was problem-solving. It was putting students in teams. It had a lot of many good aspects to it. So it was definitely a gain over the sit and get traditional form of listening to somebody. but it was still teacher directed. And over the last few years, it's become more student directed and personalized as the world has moved towards the recognition we really need to use this old term, empower learners and actually give them the tools to do their own work. And with this COVID situation, that is actually, I think, increased. I sense a lot of movement towards what we call passion projects, where students are investigating topics of great interest to them on their own. And that means they cut across subjects and standards, and they might do a little bit of English, they might do a little bit of math, they might do a little bit of science, but they're not in that silo any longer. And they're moving out into experiences that are meaningful to them. And again, that's why I think when they get back to school, they may be a bit restless.
Yeah, fair point. And it's interesting, Tom, in our context with adult professionals who are upskilling and changing careers and having to go through that process, very much the same trends are emerging in the sense that having to work in real projects and having that project-based experience seems to be the primary preference for those people who are going back to study after leaving it for many years in some cases. So I guess for those younger people about to enter the workforce, as well as the adult professionals who may have suddenly found themselves out of employment due to the coronavirus, what can they be doing to better future-proof their careers through education?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of the folks that you see in your business have not had the benefit of a project-based learning education. So then, in a way, they have to go back and relearn some of those skills and have those experiences again. And what's interesting, I think, Chris, is that, and you and I have had some conversations about this before, we're really trying to find a learning model that offers a seamless experience between what you do in the classroom and what you do once you leave school. And that seamless experience is starting to evolve what we call a project mindset. So it's not strictly project-based learning, which is pretty much of an educational term. It's a project mindset, the kind of thing that Harness practices. And that project mindset, to me, is made up of, first of all, challenge, the ability to take on a problem, the ability to look at a problem, the ability to move through to a solution, and to see challenge as the opportunity. The ability then to work with others effectively to solve the problem, because no one solves problems alone these days. So that collaborative skill. And then the ability to move through, find solutions, and actually present those solutions. Now, in the case of, for example, a UX designer, you might be presenting your UX thoughts to someone who might be buying your product or buying you. But really, it's a storytelling, publicly sharing kind of mentality where you take your work and turn it back out for someone to look at. And that's what I call a project mindset. And that's what I'd like to get to in school. So they're doing that in school, they're doing that at work. And when someone emerges from a school environment at, say, age 17 or 18, they just move into a work environment effortlessly, if you will, because they did that in school. Now, I understand that everybody hasn't had that experience, so you have to sort of go back and retrain yourself. Plenty of ways to do that, plenty of resources. But I think more than anything, it's not so much a matter of training as a reflecting on who you are as a person and what your skills and strengths are. And so all of this, for me, the foundation is a good ability to self-reflect on who you are, decide what your skills are, decide what your challenges are, and have a way to kind of like grow yourself. It's a growth mindset kind of enterprise. And when that happens, I think you'll be fine. Because one of the interesting things about project-based learning, it's a natural way to learn.
Yeah.
The way we learn, if you think about it, is through challenge. Big challenges, little challenges. How am I going to learn to tie my shoelaces, all the way to how am I going to make a living?
I like to say
life is made of challenge. And we overcome and we learn. And that's how we do it. And project-based learning replicates that process.
Absolutely. We like to say to our students that it's a sandbox for your life. It's an opportunity in the project to chunk everything down into a self-development process and at the same time solve whatever the challenge of the project is. So it's very human-based as much as task-orientated. Great. And so if we then look forward to organisations on the other side of this coin, Thom, and thinking about their future success, what they need to be doing to future-proof themselves, so that there is an employment market for these students. What should companies be looking to invest in as we emerge from this once-in-a-generational event?
I think that companies, first of all, ought to be looking upstream by thinking about who's coming out of schools to join them and to join the workforce in general, because it's inadequate at the moment, because we're just getting all sorts of comments and observations from people in the workforce that the graduates who are coming their way do not have exactly the skills and attitudes that they would like to see. So I listened to a man the other day from a company who said, I get graduates who are coming from very high-end colleges and universities. I give them a problem or a challenge, and they come back to me immediately and say, well, I've got a problem, I don't know what to do. And he said, that's why I hired you, so you can solve those problems. So I think that companies in the past have made actually grave mistakes by thinking that they're supporting education when really they're supporting formal schooling of the kind that does not lead to the workforce skills that you're looking for. So my first recommendation to companies is to support progressive project-based enterprises in school, not just traditional learning. It's not going to get us where we need to go. Now, once you get graduates, that's a different matter, and you really have to retrain them or untrain them and somehow offer them project experiences, which I think requires, as you do, mentoring and some guidance from adults who know how to do this, because many times a 21, a 22, a 23-year-old doesn't quite know how to do this. They do need some guidance from a mentor, and I think mentorships are one of the most effective ways that can happen.
Yeah, 100% agree with that, Thom. One of the questions I wanted to ask you is more of a specific question. Our partners in this Unlocked video series is a program called Bright, which is initiated by Lendlease, which is an Australian development company. The Bright program strives to foster stronger community among its residential and commercial development precincts. So I wanted to ask a question around social connection and mental health. So many of us these days, we live in major cities, they're high density in close proximity to commercial hubs and connected to all manner of devices at the same time. Yet what we're seeing in reports is that there's an increased degree of isolation and related mental health issues. How do you see, what ways do you see that we can address these more modern issues, and can education in this project mindset concept play a pivotal role?
It's a big question. I have a few answers or a few thoughts about how you might answer it, Chris. For one thing, project-based learning, and this is a big statement, but when it's done well and when it is organized around passion and purpose and meaningful, and students are engaged in work that matters to them, and they experience that sense of mastery or even sometimes sense of joy in doing good work, that in itself is somewhat healing. So I believe that the atmosphere of school right now can actually work against mental health. So I'm working towards systems that support mental health through meaningful engagement with meaningful issues. So I think that is important. And I noticed looking through some of the materials you sent me that there's a great interest, for example, in sustainable development goals. These are the kinds of things that attract students and get them working harmoniously together and working purposely. Is that a mental health solution? No. The problem is deeper than that. But if you want to start, you have a system of schooling that supports health, or as they call it in Australia, a term I love, well-being, as opposed to social emotional learning, which is what they call it in the States, which isn't nearly as powerful as the term well-being. But really, there are ways that schools can support well-being even during instruction. Now, that is not always the case. I follow Australia very carefully, and I know the dialogue around what schools are doing negatively to students. There's a lot of talk about that, but it is possible in schools that are doing harmonious project, meaningful work. I think the kids respond very well. Not going to solve every problem, but that's a piece of the problem.
Great. Well, yeah, definitely a big question, but I think you hit the nail on the head there, Tom, for sure. So if we think about the differences geographically, you sort of touched on a little bit in that question, but I just want to go a little bit deeper. You've spent some time traveling to Australia, working with various organisations, including ourselves. How does the education landscape here in Australia differ to what's happening over in the US, for example?
It doesn't. It's the same.
Right.
Here's an interesting fact, Chris. The conversation about education is worldwide, and it's all founded on the same conversational principles, such as formal education is not suiting the needs of young people anywhere. Everyone complains about that who's in the educational field. The system of tests and standards is inadequate for measuring achievement and the kinds of skills that you're looking for young people to graduate with. The enforced set of subjects and curriculum, which I don't know the exact history of Australia, but it's got to be very close to us, in which, you know, the curriculum was largely set in 1890 and has barely deviated since then. If you look at a lineup of courses that a high schooler is supposed to take in 1890, the transcript looks almost identical. That's not a really good commentary on our system. But I have found over the last few years that everywhere you go, whether it's China, Australia, US, Canada, Europe, the conversation is very, very similar among educators, and the dissatisfactions are very similar among educators. And frankly, that's why I have formed this new organization, which you referred to at the top of the webinar, Voices of a Learning World, because I am trying to bring together 15 or 20 global educators from all over the world who can sort of spearhead this discussion, because it is a global conversation.
Yeah. Excellent initiative, Tom. Love to hear more as that develops as well, for sure. So if we then think about the sort of finer details of the assessment process, then within these educational institutions, the same conversation around the world, as you mentioned. From your perspective, what makes for an effective assessment process? If what we've got to date has been archaic and unchanging for such a long period of time, maybe you can talk a little bit about what those limitations are and where we can go next with this project mindset approach. And we've done some work, quite a lot of work actually, on that assessment process, and we're seeing initial responses from our students that's really positive, and not just from a experience point of view, but seeing growth within 9 weeks in some cases of capability, not just in their technical skills, but their attitudinal strengths as well. So yeah, I'd love to hear your view on that, because I know that's really primary to all of this.
Well, I think you're nearly as good an expert on this as I am, Chris. You've been through this with what you do in the Harness projects and had to really deal deeply with this kind of issue. But I'll go back first to what I just said a moment ago. There is dissatisfaction with the testing system and the high standards issue, which have been presented as a way to get rigorous deep learning, but in fact is a way really to retain information, not memorize all the time. I think sometimes it's not true that students have to memorize as much as we think they do, but they do have to assemble facts and they have to respond to facts. And it's really not the kind of environment that challenges their growth mindset or challenges their skill set. It really challenges their ability to do a lot of work the night before the test and to try to get as much information into short-term memory as possible so they perform well. But it's not the kind of fluid intelligence or the kind of growth mindset that you and I know are both interested in how do you develop those skills. And then a big question, as you're noting, is how do you assess? And the only way I see that you're going to be able to do that really is two ways. One is you have to set up very well thought out performance standards that are not so much extrinsic, but they deal with the intrinsic part of people's performance, which requires them to reflect and also requires a conversation between the mentor or peers in order to sort of get at, well, am I progressing in these areas? So a really good set of rubrics or performance standards, a spreadsheet, if you will, almost of here's my journey and here's where I can go and here's where I know that I've accomplished something and I can see two areas where I still need to grow and I can do better. That's one thing. The second thing is you almost these days need a portfolio of work. You can't do a snapshot anymore. A snapshot is just one day in time. You may be having a bad day. You may be blanked out on something. It's not really a great way to measure accomplishments in learning. So a portfolio, which very common in the UX field, in which people create a portfolio of their accomplishments. And I think very much trying to move to the same thing in education, a portfolio that students can, in a way, curate. And they can look at the 5 best pieces of work they've done and maybe discard one and thought, that didn't do so well, that's fine. Mm-hmm. And then they can present a body of work to whoever is going to assess, and I won't say assess them so much as assess with them. It's really a conversation these days, which of course drives educators a bit crazy because it's difficult to standardize that, it's difficult to quantify that, and it's difficult to address or offer that in any kind of mass way. And whether you're in Australia or the US or virtually any other country, we love mass assessment, where we can sit everybody down in one day, do the tests and score, and those days are kind of over. I don't think we can do it anymore if we're going to get to the kinds of skills and attitudes and growth that you and I are talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the idea of portfolio being industry skill basis wide. It's been such a sort of focus of the design industry for many years, but I don't see any reason why that shouldn't be across every other industry as well.
Not only every other industry, Chris, it should be imported as a staple of educational practices. That's what we need to do.
100%. Yeah, and it goes back to your other point earlier about storytelling. It's a story of your development, of who you are and what your capabilities are. To link those projects to your own self-development, I think is a really great opportunity for people who are finishing schooling, entering the workforce and wanting to demonstrate to hiring managers what makes them unique. So I hope people really take that on board when they're thinking about it, not just design students.
Right, absolutely. You can design anything these days. You can design a social studies or social, project. You can do that. You can design an answer to anything. And so the design, it is interesting, the design process and design thinking more and more has been imported into the project-based learning process. For my work, design thinking is integral to PBL.
Yeah, foundational. Thom, I wanted to ask you if you had any interesting progressive stories from places that you've traveled, institutions that you've visited, that has seen really successful outcomes. Maybe they've sort of stepped out of the mold of what's happening in the rest of their local communities in terms of the project mindset work that they're doing. But yeah, any examples like that you'd like to share?
Education is quite interesting, Chris, in that it is fragmented everywhere. US, it's very fragmented. You can have a great school doing wonderful projects, and then a mile down the road, they can be a school that's not doing anything or thinking about transforming. I think that's a bit true in Australia as well. For example, I could point to 4 or 5 high schools in the Sydney area that are amazing project-based learning work. Probably not all faculty, all teachers, but they have pockets of excellence in which the projects are great. So right now I've got at least 5 Sydney schools, and some in Victoria and also some in South Australia working on my online courses, and I'm seeing the quality of the projects they're doing, and they're very, very high. And even better, the schools are moving towards systematic application of projects, not just leaving it to a pocket of a few teachers who are interested in this. So when you talk about progressive stories, you don't have to go very far. You really don't. You can find this in South Wales. You can find it in many places. You and I are both acquainted with Dubbo Distance Education. I work with a colleague there, and she does fabulous projects. I broadcast globally all the time because it's such great work. It's in a distance environment, which is somewhat unusual, but not right now it isn't. So actually it's become sort of a model. So there's just all sorts of great stories. They do tend to get buried, for example, in the headlines of the newspapers, and they show up publicly as much as I would like. So a lot of people don't know about them. It's kind of educational sort of discourse. But honestly, if you had reporters for some of the Sydney papers who would go out and do stories on this, they would find some fantastic work being done.
Yeah, great point, Tom. Well, hopefully discussions like this can keep raising the profile and get that message out there. It's a funny thing. We all know it. Every education challenge that teachers and organizational directors come across, they know that this stuff is absolutely necessary. It's just, as we know, sometimes change on a global scale takes some time, but we have a real opportunity now with everything going on. So I really appreciate your time today, Tom. We are out of time. Amazing insights. Could talk to you for hours, I feel. But I wanted to ask, if people wanted to reach you, where would they go to get in contact?
Well, they can go to the website. I think that's a good place to start. That's www.pblglobal.com. That's a good place. If somebody wants to contact me directly, it's Thom, Thom, at pblglobal.com. I'm happy to answer. I answer a lot of queries from Australia and have really constant conversations with people in Australia. So that works very well for me. Happy to do that. I'm a conversationalist about this, and I'm passionate about this, as you know. And so if somebody's got something they want to talk about, I'll talk to them.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate your time, and stay safe and stay well.
Thank you so much, Chris. Hope to see you sometime in October or so.
Yes, fingers crossed. Look forward to it.
Thank you for watching Unlocked by Harness Projects. For more information on how our real company projects help you learn the skills required for the future of work, head over to harnessprojects.com.au and follow us on Facebook. If you want to find out more about partnering on a Harness project, email us at info@harnessprojects.com.au.